Hi, I'm Neal. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 13th, 2003, and I'm very grateful to have that. And welcome, everyone. It's good to see you out. And, I always pray, God, let it be a message and not a mess. So you all might want to bow your heads now, too. So I remember 2 months ago, I don't know if Jane's here, but she stood up here and she said, being up here is like being naked on a stripper pole. And I've been thinking about that, and first of all, I'm not going to be naked on the stripper pole. Let's just get that out of the way. But there is this story of when I had 90 days sober. First thing, just barely, still in IOP and all that stuff. And I got asked to speak at one of the local meetings, because they want to keep it green. And so I show up there, and I don't have a lot to say about sobriety. So I proceeded to go and give everything that I had to say. And, I'll talk about it later, but I did meth, and we don't go to the library and read books when we're on meth. So I just threw it out there. I mean, some people might call it a fifth step, but I definitely shared. It was what it was like, how many were there, and what they were doing. And so it was out there. And, as soon as it was over, now I'm sure this isn't true, but in my mind's eye, it was like church. All of a sudden, everyone looked like they had white shirts and ties and everything, and they were just staring back at me with these blank faces. And I knew that it was not good. But the only thing is, what they said that kind of made me feel better is they all said, "Keep coming back." And so I thought, well, okay, it couldn't have been too bad. But then I learned there's keep coming back, and then there's keep coming back, keep coming back. And so then I realized what they were saying. And when I got to Texas, we had the same thing, but we called it, bless your heart. So hopefully I won't do a fifth step here. I thought I'd maybe start a little bit about my childhood experience and what it was like. I came from a good home. I had 3 older brothers. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. This is the 60s, And I learned later we didn't have a lot of money, and that she baked bread because it was cheaper than going to the store to buy it. She made our clothes because, it was saving money and stuff. But I didn't really know any of that because I had every toy at Christmas time. I had everything given to me that I could have wanted. And so, I really did have a good home. And I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but, for the longest time, the story I thought was I had a terrible upbringing. Look what they've done to me. I've turned out this way and it's their fault. But, now that I'm sober and honest, it's it was good. I had it pretty good. And when I was little, I used to remember that I was something of a loner, and that I felt like I didn't really fit in, even at 6 or 5 or whatever. I'd be walking home from school by myself, and my mind would just be off in my head. I'd just be in my head thinking, and that's kind of the rest of my life, was just getting off into my head. And other kids, when I would see them playing, it's they had something, and I didn't get it. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know why, but it was clear that I wasn't part of that, and I didn't know. And so that's kind of how I started. But okay, some of you, probably few of you, are from the 60s. But in the 1960s, towards the end, they had this TV show called Wild Wild West. Anyone heard of that? No. Few people, good. The thing about Wild Wild West, and I was 7 or 8 or something, they had this guy on there, and it was James West, and it was played by Robert Conrad. And Robert Conrad, he had it all. He He'd have these episodes with his shirt off, and he was muscular, hairy chest. He wore these tight pants on it, and it was my favorite show. I would never miss that show, but I had no idea then why. I just oh, this is the best show ever made, And so I think I kind of came out of the womb probably a little bit gay, and so... But I didn't know what it was, and as I grew older, I started to know what it was, and I started to know that this is not okay. This is, boys don't like boys. Now, until about 9 or 10, boys don't like girls either, but I knew there was something wrong with me, and it was somehow shameful. And it was something that I couldn't tell anyone, it was a secret, and it made me somehow disconnected from everyone else. And I didn't quite know why that was. When I got into high school, we used to have this thing where you'd be in the hallway and someone would hand you a little slip of paper. And that paper would say the intersection of County Road 3 and County Road 4 or whatever, and that's where you'd go and there'd be a keg party. And so you'd park all the way up and down those roads, and there was a keg, and we'd just stand around and drink. And, little red cups. And so we would do that, and I would look at all these people that I didn't really fit in with because they were cheerleaders, they were football players, they were all the people that had what I didn't. And I drank, and I didn't care. It just didn't bother me that I wasn't part of it. And frankly, I didn't want to be, because I wanted to just sit with my cup and just sit and have my drinks. And, I figured if I had to interact, it would take away from my drinking. And so that's just how I was. And I thought at that time, I was just the biggest loser, because I would see all these people, and I just didn't think I fit in. I didn't think that they would want me to fit in or to be part of it. But again, one of these, what I thought and what reality was when we get sober, I was junior class president. I was senior class president. But when I ran for student body president, this football player beat me. And so again, this idea that came into my mind is, it was great to be senior class president, but I lost. Because as senior class president, the only thing that would make me worthwhile or make me good enough is student body president. No matter what I had, it was never enough. It was never enough. And so this is my idea. But for example, I graduated high school with honors. You'd think that's good, and I'd feel good about myself. I wasn't valedictorian. Clearly, there's always this step down from what I think is going to make me okay. I always got this idea, if I can get there, everything's be fine. I've learned a lot later in sobriety that what I had, I read Carl Jung called it a spiritual thirst for wholeness. What was missing in me was this thirst that I wanted something to make me whole, something to make me feel okay. I didn't know then that it was a spiritual problem. I thought it was just me being born the way I was, and it was just not available to me. I went to a good college, and the first day of college, freshman orientation, I was passed out by 5 o'clock and missed all the parties that night and everything. And I don't quite remember what I did during that day, but that kind of started my whole college career, because it was all about drinking. And when I think it was a sophomore, we had dorm rooms, and then we had faculty residents that were there. Well, in this particular dorm room, we had Father Bruce, and Father Bruce taught me how to make a martini. And perfect martini, perfect mix and everything. So I thought it would be really cool if I had a martini before going over to the cafeteria every night. And I was probably the only person on my floor that was having cocktail hour before we went to school, but that just seemed so cool because I had seen Bewitched, and I don't know if you know that show. But Darren Stevens would come home for work. She'd have all of the martinis set up, and he'd pour one. I thought, that's the life. I want to be Darren Stevens. And so that's how it was for me in college. Eventually, though, I got out of college, and kind of during that time, I started hitting all the gay bars, because there I was clearly going to fit in. This was going to be my people, kind of a thing. But you know what? I didn't feel I belonged there either. I went there seeking companionship and approval, as we say in the big book. And still, it was never enough. I'd find someone to go home with, and then it was like, but that better-looking person didn't want me. Or that guy with better clothes, better dancer, better body, or whatever, he didn't like me. Now, again, it was like I couldn't have enough to make myself feel whole, make myself feel that I'm worthwhile. Then I got out of that college, graduated, strangely enough, also with honors, but not. There's 2 levels of honors. I was the lower level of honors. And so I started my career, started my job, and what happened is I got into this great habit because I didn't want to drink too much, because I knew that I like to drink. I love to drink. So what I'd do after work, I would come home from work, and I would pour myself a gin and tonic. And I was going to, cocktail hour again, Darren Stevens, I'm good. And then I would take a sleeping pill, and then I would order Chinese food for dinner. Now, there was always a little bit of a question what was going to happen in what order. Am I going to be awake enough to get the Chinese food? Am I going to pass out? Is it going to happen for me? And fortunately, more time than not, I was able to eat and then go pass out. And also, fortunately, I didn't make a lot of phone calls. So that was good. But at one point, I moved to LA for my job. And in LA, I really started crystal meth. I got full on into it. I was living alone. I didn't have any friends. It was a new city and didn't have AA to meet people. And so I just got into meth. And the thing about meth for me is it makes my clothes fall off. And so I got into the scene, which is, party and play, chemsex, that kind of a thing, where you get around, you have some anonymous people that you don't bother with their names, and you walk in, the clothes come off, the lines come out, and that's your weekend kind of a thing. And that's what I did. And what it was like for me, it was like Jekyll and Hyde. Because during the week, never enough, have to work hard, got to get those promotions, got to do all this, got to be the best person in the job, because eventually it's going to hit that level. And then there was the weekends, where I was that person that didn't have to care. I didn't have to achieve all that stuff and be on that treadmill. And it was like a vacation. I'd take that first hit, and it was like, I could just leave that person at work. I didn't have to be that person. And the lower I got, the better the relief was from all the responsibility that I tried to have. One day, one night or day, I can't remember exactly, but I had, got a hookup coming over, and he was going to be great. I was all ready. And so I'm like at my little apartment getting ready. The clothes are going off, the music is dimming, the porn is going on the TV. I've got the little lines of meth laid out, this is going to be good. So I open the door, and it's the repo man. He's come for my car because somewhere in the last several months, I didn't even remember to pay my car payment. It just left my mind. And so that was a bit embarrassing. And remember now, this is LA. Nobody walks in LA. that's supposed to be funny, you know? You're like too young for that song, obviously. So what happened was I thought that the thing I needed to fix everything was a relationship. I needed to find him. And what he was going to be is a guy who lived in that good world, lived in the Dr. Jekyll world, and he was going to pull me into it. And so I would find these guys that had everything going on, and then I would try to act like them. I would try to fit in because I wanted the life they had, and if I could just have a relationship and act like it, then I would be in that. And at the same time, though, when I wasn't with him or something, I was off with Mr. Hyde, off partying, off, doing stuff. And what happened at one point is I was dating this guy. He was great, nice guy, and I made the mistake, now I see it as a mistake. I gave him the key to my apartment. And I was, with some people doing meth and doing what I do, and all of a sudden I hear the key at the door. And I'm like, crap. Now, fortunately, or unfortunately, whatever, the apartment I had in San Francisco, you would walk up the front stairs, but I had a back exit. So here I am trying to rush everyone out. Here, grab your clothes, get. But he came in and saw everything. And in that moment, the two worlds collided. There was no keeping them separate. They were all one world, and it didn't look good. And the reflection I saw of myself in his eyes, it was impossible to see because it let me see exactly what that world was and what I looked like in it, and that the secret was up. And that night he left, and I was sitting there in my apartment thinking, this is the end, it's all blown up now. There was never going to be a guy that was going to fix everything, because I could never live in that world, because I was this other person over here, and I thought, you know what, I might as well kill myself. This is as good as it gets, and it's pretty crappy. And I was sitting there thinking about it, and I don't know if you have this experience where just this little teeny tiny spark of hope shows up. And I don't know where it comes from, I don't know what it meant, but this idea came to me that maybe it could be different. Those 4 words, when we're in that point, that maybe it could be different, was enough to get me to go to treatment, to start the sober journey, because until then I didn't think it could be better. But that's what we get here. We come to AA, or we walk into our first meeting, and we walk in with this little idea that it may be different. I don't think it will. I think you're all crazy, whatever all that is. But in our minds is that little idea, that spark of hope. So I went to treatment. And it was a good treatment center. It was great. But unfortunately, it was not run as well as it could be. I didn't think the counselors were doing that good of a job when I would sit in groups. And, I was that guy in treatment that was like, leave it alone, I'll take care of this, kind of a thing. And so I appointed myself the counselor to the group. I was all like, well, let me help you with what I think I hear you saying is, and I was all about everyone else and everything. And so I finally had realized that it was not just something I could pitch in and help. Someone had to make some changes at the top. So I went to see the director of the program. And I said, hey, you know what, I work in HR, so, I'm really qualified here. And so let me tell you all the things about this program that's not quite working. And I'd go through everything, and yeah, he'd be, thank you. Well, why don't you come back next week and tell me how it's going next week? Well, after 30 days, he's like, you've been so much help. We have this 6-month program now, and we'd love to have your feedback on that. And so Yeah, I don't think I was ever going to get out of there. But the good thing about treatment is I found AA. You know, they would bring meetings in, we would go out to meetings, and I found AA. And what happened when I went in the room for the first time, people shared things that I would never tell another person. But it was right there in my gut, the things they said. And it was things that you would never want anyone to know, that you had this problem or this problem, whatever. And I think, and I didn't know it at the time, but that was when I first heard the language of the heart that we speak in here. And it kind of blew me away. And it was like, wow, I can start to get real and let some of these walls down when I did that. But when I was in AA the first time, and I had a relapse down the road, the thing I thought is my problem was meth and alcohol. That everything, you know, that valedictorian, that better boyfriend, that job, all of those things that I couldn't quite get to, the problem was meth, the problem was alcohol. And if I could take those out of the picture, I'd have a clean runway. I'd be getting all those things, and I would feel better about myself because I'd get those things. And that's the program I worked, you know, and good things did happen. You know, you show up to work and they give you a promotion, that kind of thing. You pay your bills and they give you more credit. And so good things happened for me. I found that the fellowship is what I'd craved. You know, during those times of feeling outside, I craved the fellowship, and I threw myself into that. The steps, however, I didn't do them that hard because I didn't have as bad of a case as a lot of the people I heard, so I didn't think I needed to do all that. But the outsides got better. You know, I had good friends, and they had good things going on. But I continued some of the behavior that I was doing before I came in the rooms, just wasn't using and doing the same things. I didn't feel sober. And you know what? Those two people started to happen again. I was the guy that had the friends in AA that went to the meetings, that got chips, did all of that. But then I also had to have this dark world to retreat to get a vacation from me and all of that I thought I needed to be happy. And so eventually I relapsed. You know, I was on that slippery slope, and it was pretty much just there, and it happened. And you know, the thing about that relapse, and if any of you have had that experience, after being in AA, you know where the answer is. You know what's going on, and there's no denial that I'm just in the disease. At this point, it's no holds barred. You're just in it. And that's what happened to me, and I knew the answer was to go back to AA. I knew that I had to talk to my friends, but for some reason, I just couldn't do it. Now, I had some tries of doing it, and I remember this one meeting, and I talked to this guy from the program, and well, he was like, if there was ever a homecoming king and queen, he was like the homecoming king of AA. You know, the best looking, the guy everybody looked up to, you know, everything. And he says, Neal, why don't you just come out to dinner with us before the meeting? And I'm like, okay, I'm high on meth. Eating food. This is going to be awkward. So I get there, and you know what they did, I'll never forget, is they didn't ask me, how was it? How you doing? Is it any better out there? You know, they didn't jump on me. And they just let me sit and be part of the group without having to do anything or show anything or answer any questions. And I'll never forget that, because it's so easy for me as a sober person to grab someone who's back from a relapse and want to shake them and want to really, you know, throw my arms around them and talk them sober or whatever. And it was so nice that they didn't do that. And I told them walking over to the meeting, I'm like, I don't know if I can go, you know. People are going to look at me and say, you know, whatever. And what he said to me, I get teary when he says it, but he always said to me when we were walking, he said, just come sit by me. Just come sit by me. And I'm like, you're like the homecoming king, that kind of thing. And so it's just come sit by me. And somehow that made it okay to go in that room. I'd like to say I got sober after that, but no, didn't happen. I continued. And what did happen, though, is my friends from AA were still calling me, trying to, get me to go back to meetings, being kind and all that. But I got to this point where it was crystal clear, no pun, it was clear that my life was never going to change. How it is right then is how it was going to continue, and it was just going to get worse. And so I decided then and there, I've got to quit. I've got to quit. And so I would say, you know what, tomorrow morning, when I've run out of everything I have, I'm going to start my sobriety clock again. Well, by the next morning, it was going to be the following morning. Or after a run of being up for 7 days, I'd have what I used to call the big sleep. Everything's going to be better if I can just sleep. And so I'd have the big sleep and think I was going to, start AA, and I couldn't. And what I realized is I was using against my will. I fully meant that I was going to start over and that I was going to be sober and that I was going to, start my clock over, but I absolutely, nothing I could commit or willpower or anything would make that happen. And I think that's the first time I fully understood that part of the first step that says I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. And I also saw that I was completely alone. I didn't want to, there were no sex parties by that point. I just wanted to be alone. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want anything to do with anyone. I was just withdrawn into my world. And what I realized at that time too is that I can't manage my world. I can't make my life happen. All those things that I thought if I could just get them, totally out of reach for me. Totally out of reach. And so what happened is, and this was another God thing, is this guy who I knew from that group of people, my friends and stuff, he called me one day and he says, Neal, I think you're not going to be able to quit unless you go to a treatment center or a rehab. And I said, no, I can't do that. I have this new puppy that I have to take out every day. If you know San Francisco, if you have a car, you have to move it every week for street cleaning, or else they take your car and charge you $100 a day. And I'm like, I have my car, and I have to move my car, and it's just not going to happen. I'll quit. I'll just quit. And he said, Neal, I'm going to move into your apartment. I'm going to take care of your dog, and I'm going to move your car for you. Now will you go? And, what could I say? And that's the kind of love we show each other in here. It's not just that we talk to each other, it's that we reach out and we do things. And, I went to treatment the second time. And I'd been sober 7 years and relapsed, so I went off to treatment, but things were different. For some reason, things were different. When he dropped me off at the airport to go to this treatment center, and by the way, I picked this treatment center because they had really cute guys sitting around a pool on their website. I got there and the pool was all like full of yellow, slime. It had that little puddle of water in the bottom, and I don't know where those hot guys were. So he drops me off at the airport though, and I'm sitting there figuring out what I'm going to do, because I'm going to go to treatment, then I'm going to come back, I'm going to get this job, and then I'm going to do this with my money, and then I'm going to do this. I was writing the to-do list for sober Neal after treatment. And I was like on it, I was telling him all these things and stuff. And he looked at me when he dropped me off and he said, Neal, sobriety is like a river. It works best where you just go where it takes you. And at that moment, the penny dropped. The penny dropped. It's like, I don't have to figure out what's going to happen. I can just be. I can just go to treatment and take the next 24 hours. And I think in that moment, I really worked the first 3 steps. I totally was powerless to make my life happen. There was something, the current in the water, something was going to take me into the future, and it's okay if I just relax and let that happen. And I think that really is when the first 3 steps happened to me, and it really started my sobriety. And what happened is when I started over again, I told myself, I'm a newcomer. I don't know anything. I don't have 7 years. I don't want to get in here and pick up where I left off, kind of thing, because where I left off was pretty bad. So I decided to start over, doing the steps, doing everything that was asked of me, and I got better. I got better. And early on, I did an autopsy on my relapse, basically, and I wanted to know what happened. What was going on and why did I relapse? And so what I did is I opened up the book, and there's a chapter more about alcoholism, and it goes through story after story of someone who was sober and then they relapsed, someone who was sober and then they relapsed. And it says right at the beginning, these are the mental states that precede a relapse. And I thought, well, this is it, and I'm going to read it. And you know what? It answered those questions, because tick, 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 I was every one of those examples. One of the things it talked about is fellowship, attending meetings, being highly involved in AA. Not enough. You can relapse after all that. No amount of time in the program, no amount of experience in sobriety is going to keep you sober. You'll relapse. No amount of knowing the book, quoting the pages, being able to really recite all of it is going to keep you sober, because they had someone in there that did that. And the most important thing about it is, if you don't expand your spiritual condition, then you're not going to stay sober. And so when I read all that, I was like, yeah, that is the cause of death. That is the cause of relapse. And so I decided that things had to change. Now, I moved to Dallas at this time, and things were different. I made friends, but the friends I made were not the ones that had all the things, that were the successful business people, owned houses or whatever. They were the people that were doing the program. They were the people that were working the inside part of the program. And it felt, I don't know how to say it, how different it felt. I met my future husband in one of those rooms. And the truth is, so he came in, I'll just tell a little story. I was going to this meeting, and he showed up one time, and he was wearing like some kind of, much like he dresses now, kind of like cowboyish, whatever. And he was talking about, up at Cirque, where I went, they actually made me clean up the horse poop after the horses that were there. And I'm like, this is good. This guy, he went to the top tier treatment centers. They had horses, They did. It was no pool with the green puddle in the bottom. This was really something. But I knew he was someone I had to get to know. And I did something different as far as dating that I'd done before. Is I learned that you just ask someone out on a date. You don't have to buy the wedding outfit. You don't have to go register with Macy's or Dillard's or anything. And you don't have to say, can I see myself with him in 10 years? Wonder what my family will think of him. I could just ask him out. We could just do something. Now, there's a... Okay, so here's the truth about asking him out. So I'd ask this other guy out. He had long hair. He was good looking. He was everything. And, he calls me up Saturday afternoon and said, hey, you can't go. I got something else going on. And I'm like, well, F you, And then I'm like, oh, wait, I'll ask Lance out. And, did the right thing happen? The right thing happened, and this is just how God works, is I went out with Lance, and everything just fit. There's something about it. It was like we grew up in the same era. We knew the same things. I could ask him, like, I don't know, did your mother ever make this food for you? And he said, oh, yeah. We had all the same references growing up, and it just fit. It just fit. And, you know, we were both in sobriety. He was in his first year, I was in mine. And doesn't count as 13th step if you're both in your first year. So we started going out, and, you know, we made an agreement up front, and that was if either of us relapse, you know, we love each other, but we're not going to go through that. We're just not. That's the end. And for some reason, I think that helped, having that kind of hard line, because when things got tough, it was the hard line, and I think we stayed sober. But the other thing, too, is there's two schools of thought, like, oh, I never want to date anyone in the rooms, or I only want to date people in the rooms. For me, it was helpful, because we had a common language. We also had the same priorities. So when I was talking about having to do this in my program, he understood that. When he was telling me about problems he was having with someone at work and what he was going to do about it, I understood that. And so there was this kind of mutual understanding of our program and how important it was. And if any of you are in relationships with people in the program, the one bit of advice I can pass along that I've learned is we're not each other's sponsor. You know, I can't tell him what I think he needs to do with his program, and he can't tell me. Now, here's the truth, is the closest I would allow myself to come is, gee, Lance, have you talked to your sponsor lately? How's he doing? I haven't heard you talk about him much. What's going on with him? So that was the passive-aggressive approach to do that. But in our marriage and being together, we moved. We moved to England. We moved to New York. We moved here. And it was great. I went to England. We both went to England, and we went to a meeting. And, boy, I got a lesson there. I got a lesson in humility, you know. Sweet little old lady, and God love the little old ladies in AA, you know, they're the best. And she comes up to me, and we were going to move there, and she's like, so what is it you're going to do here in England for your job? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be the managing director of this part of Nokia, and we're going to do all this. And, you know, I was really laying it on because I wanted her to know that I'd gotten there, you know. And sweet little old lady, she looks at me and she says, oh, that sounds really grand. And I said, well, yeah, you know, trying to show humility and like, oh, I don't know, it's nothing much, but whatever. And she says, no, sweetie, it isn't, I didn't say it is grand. I said it sounds grand. Whoa. There you go. That kind of put me in my place, but God love her. So over the last 20 years of sobriety, I've been very involved. I've worked the steps, and I practice the principles, which is another form of working the steps. I did 4 and 5, but what I've learned about it is 4 and 5 becomes a way of life, right? 4 and 5 is about looking at myself in situations and getting honest with a sponsor or other people in the rooms. I used to hear it called telling on yourself. Coming into a room and showing the dirty laundry, showing that I'm not like the grand poobah of everything. There was this example of when that happened is, some of you may know this, but I have a Tesla, and and the way it's set up is the new model, and you order it, but they give you a date it's going to ship in 3 months. Well, then they give you a date 4 months, then it's 5 months, and it's longer and longer, and I'm more and more resentful. And what do you do when you have a resentment? Go to a meeting and share about it. Hold them hostage, you know, really let them know how bad that car company is. And I was like, come on, can you pray for me? You know, I really need. And the people that were members of the LDS church, could you go to the temple? Could you really, really try to help me with this? And on and on and on and on. Well, I got the car, and it was a glorious day. You know, it was everything I'd hoped for. But that week it was a little bit snowy, and so 3 days into it, I slide into this pickup in Provo and wreck the whole front end. And I'm like, there is no way I can tell those people, because they are going to laugh at me. After all of this, I will be so embarrassed and so ashamed, I'll have to move to another city, you know? I will just have to take my wrecked car and just move with it. Well, I got myself together, and I thought, well, you know what? Just fix it. Just fix the car. You know, so I drive up to the body shop, and I'm going to get it fixed and everything, and I'm parking. Now, it's kind of a narrow parking lot. It was a hard time to get turned, and I turned in. I'm like, you know what? I don't want these idiots opening their door in front of my car. And so I'm like, well, I better straighten out and stuff and leave some room between me and the car. And so I'm backing up and everything, and I put it in forward to go back in, and I go back in, but Lance is like, you didn't do anything different. You went right back in where you were. I'm like, okay, I'll try it again. So I'm backing up, and I'm really repositioning for a good, clear run at this, and I put it in drive, but it wasn't in drive. So I backed up into this Highlander. So in the course of 2 days, I wrecked the front, I wrecked the back of my car, and then I was like, no way can I tell anyone this story. It's like, you know, it will be so humiliating, you know, and I can't. But, you know what, we're as sick as our secrets. We've got to be honest. It's an honest program. So I go into the meeting Saturday morning, some of you were there, and I tell this story. You know, red-faced, I tell this story. I tell you, I think Corey is still laughing about it. You know, he probably, because he was the one I asked to go to the temple. But you know, that's what we learn in here. We learn to laugh at ourselves. You know, I take my program really seriously, but I hope I never take myself seriously. You know, because that's that person that was drinking in his soup with a beer, feeling sorry for myself. The lessons I've learned, too, is to continue working the steps. When I got to 6 and 7 again, I found that it's an ongoing set of steps. In the book, it's like, you know, wait an hour, say this prayer, and you're on. But what I've learned, and in reading the 12 and 12, is you do those continually through the rest of your sobriety. And the way I've kind of put it in my mind to figure out what it means is I just have to be aware when I'm in those character defects. When something's happening and I'm upset, I've got to work that thing through and say, oh, that's my need for approval, character defect. That's for me doing step 6. I'm getting to the point where I've identified it and have some willingness to change it because I see what it's doing for me. And then step 7 is, you know, I try to change it and I ask for God's help to do that. So for me, that 6 and 7 is kind of what, it's sort of that spot check, but that spot check of when I'm upset, there's something wrong with me and I got to figure that out and I got to make some kind of change. You know, with 8 and 9, I didn't have money problems when I came back in. I kind of disappeared from life, so I didn't think I was really, you know, hurting people. But I had this brother that was 15 months older than me, and we grew up, and, you know, he teased me nonstop. He was just terrible, and you know, I got away from him, the family. I did what I like to call is I cut them out of my life and blamed them for abandoning me. And so I was waiting. I couldn't make an amends to him because he was so bad to me that I couldn't go face him because I couldn't let go of that. And someone in the meeting once said, and he had the worst story, his mother locked him in the closet while she did meth and had guys over and stuff, and he's like going out to see her, and I'm like, how can you do that? He said, you know, Neal, well, the way it works is you don't wait till you forgive them to go out there and to love them. You go out there, you do the things, you do the action, and eventually your feelings will change. And that's what I did with my brother. I started calling him, how you doing? What's going on with the horse barn or whatever it is you have? Just kidding. I really did know what he was doing. And I just started calling and asking about him, and I didn't want him to know or ask, or I didn't need him to be focused on me. I found pleasure in just hearing about his life, his wife, his kids, his farm, all of those things. And, I love him now. And when he calls, we talk for like an hour, because there's something about someone who knows you from birth that you can talk in a way that you just can't with anyone else, because he's got the whole reference on that. What also happened in the last 20 years is I really have started to find the way to quench that spiritual thirst with a spiritual solution. The solution isn't cars, homes, and all of those things that I thought it was. The solution is a deepening relationship and understanding of a higher power. And the spiritual growth and what happened is I learned to trust God. I learned to see these fears of the future. I just had a big meltdown fear kind of a thing and talked about it and was trying to figure it out. And, I talked to God about it. And he's like, don't worry. The worst could happen, the things you don't want to happen, but you'll be okay. A miracle could come along and something will change the circumstances and you'll be okay. And that's what the spiritual part of the program is to me, is no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And I know that. I know that deep down. I forget that. But I can come back to that center, and when I do, things are fine. It's saying from a movie is, everything's going to be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. So the other thing that happened is I started living life in 24-hour segments. I don't know if you had this experience, but everyone's like 24 hours at a time, one day at a time. And I knew what that was. That was a trick to get you to not drink that day. It's like, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, We'll drink tomorrow, all that stuff. And I was onto it, but I learned that it's not about that, or at least it wasn't about that the longer I'm sober. It's about living life 24 hours at a time. Not worrying about tomorrow, not obsessing about the past, but really getting the most out of each 24 hours and focus on your sobriety in that hour and focus on your spiritual life in that 24 hours. And that changed everything when I started understanding that and working that. But the need is that what I learned in that autopsy is I have to continue to expand my spiritual growth. Lance has a great way of saying that. He says, sobriety is like riding a bike up a hill. You're pedaling and pedaling. Well, which way do you go if you stop pedaling? You're going to go down that hill. So the spiritual growth and the working the program, it has to be something that I have to continually do. By working that program and coming to me, I go to a lot of meetings. I'm that loser that I used to think was, those people when you're new that go to meetings all the time and you're like, get a life, I'm now that person, I'm that guy that are like, newcomers are like, get a life, Neal. But I have a life, and it's beyond my wildest dreams. That once I get their place, I don't know if I'm there at what I thought it was, but I'm there. Whatever that was on the inside, I'm there and I have that, and I'm forever grateful. The thing I was thinking in going through what to say and all of this, I started reflecting on these years and where I am now, and I was blown away. I was blown away at what I've gotten from a few simple steps. Trust God, clean house, and help others. There is a God and I'm not it. These simple things of working them and the practicing of this program. We never get proficient at it. I've never got it down. I have to practice and practice and practice. And the joy comes in the practice. The joy of living. And the life I have it's beyond what I ever could have thought of. That thirst for wholeness, I feel like one person. I'm not this guy over here and this guy over here. I'm just one person. What you see is what you get. And the thing is I make mistakes all the time. I'm a very bad example of how AA works sometimes. And sometimes it's like I'm spreading the disease of alcoholism. I'm not spreading no solution. But the thing is the best any of us get to be is human. No one gets to, be better than that. And, I'm grateful for that because it means I can make mistakes. It means that I don't have to, be the valedictorian of AA. Although I wanted to in my first year. But if you're new here or if you're not new, just keep coming back. And I don't mean keep coming back. I mean, keep coming back, because these meetings and the fellowship and the program and the steps, they've changed my life. They've changed my life. I didn't even think I was going to be alive at this day and age, let alone be married, have a house, have a Tesla. All of these things. I didn't know that I would have this life, but I'm so grateful. And so my words of encouragement, wherever you are, work that 24 hours. When I came back after 7 years in a relapse, I thought, this is what it's going to be. I'm on the revolving door. Eventually people will be like, oh, you're that relapse, or why talk to you? I heard someone in a meeting, and he was telling his story, and he said, I relapsed after 10 years, and I've got 10 years now. And for some reason, that gave me that hope. Hearing that, I didn't have to be on that cycle. And so if you're coming back from a relapse, I've got 20 years now after a relapse. So it can happen. We can surrender at whatever point we surrender. And then the program takes over and it works. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. And I appreciate you listening.